The great assembly hall of Station Corvex 9 was filled with the most powerful military commanders in the galaxy, and all of them were laughing at the humans. Commander Vrethel of the Vraxi Heavy Infantry stood at the center of the chamber with his 4 massive arms crossed over his armored chest, and his mandibles clicked together in a sound that his translator turned into deep chuckling. And behind him a holographic display showed images of human soldiers crawling through mud and hiding in bushes with long rifles pressed against their shoulders. They call these warriors snipers, Vrethel announced to the gathered officers, and his voice echoed through the vast chamber. And their great skill is hiding in dirt and shooting one bullet at a time. The laughter grew louder, and it came from dozens of different species. And the sound was a strange mix of clicks and rumbles and high-pitched squeals and psychic vibrations that tickled the back of everyone's mind. Admiral Kesseth of the Marvani fleet floated forward, and her body was made of living crystal that caught the light and scattered it into rainbows across the walls. And she made a sound like wind chimes that meant she found something very funny. "One bullet?" she repeated, and her crystalline form pulsed with amusement. "We have drones that fire 10,000 rounds every second, and our infantry wear armor that can survive direct hits from plasma cannons, and the humans send us soldiers who shoot one bullet at a time from weapons that still use gunpowder." More laughter filled the chamber, and it seemed like every species in the Galactic Defense Coalition found this hilarious. The Kethri delegates clicked their insect legs together in their version of applause, and the massive Govani representatives slapped their tentacles against the floor. And even the usually silent Venikai allowed themselves small smiles. At the back of the chamber stood Captain Sarah Chun, and she was the human liaison to the coalition. And she was a small woman with black hair pulled back tight and eyes that missed nothing. And she stood perfectly still while all around her the galaxy's greatest warriors laughed at her species. She did not look angry or embarrassed or upset, and instead her face showed nothing at all. And this made a few of the more observant aliens feel slightly uncomfortable, though they could not say why. "With respect," Captain Chun said, and her voice was calm and clear and cut through the laughter like a knife through silk. "You have not seen what our snipers can do." Commander Vrethel turned to look at her, and he was 3 meters tall and covered in natural armor that could stop most weapons. And he looked down at this tiny human woman with something like pity. "We have reviewed all of your combat footage," he said, and his tone was the kind of gentle condescension that adults use with children who do not understand simple things. "And yes, your snipers are impressive for a species that still uses chemical propellants and metal projectiles. But this is a galactic war, Captain Chun, and the Dominion deploys soldiers in powered exoskeletons with energy shields rated for megajoule impacts. And your little rifles will not even scratch their armor." Captain Chun nodded slowly, as if she was considering his words very carefully. "The Dominion has been conquering worlds for 3,000 years, she said. "And in all that time has any species ever beaten them in ground combat?" The laughter died down and the chamber grew quiet because this was a sore subject. "They have superior technology," Admiral Kesseth admitted, and her crystal body dimmed slightly. "Their armor and weapons are the most advanced in the galaxy, and their soldiers are genetically enhanced for combat, and we have lost many battles against them. Every species in this coalition has tried to match their technology." Captain Chun continued, "You build bigger guns and stronger shields and faster ships, and they build bigger guns and stronger shields and faster ships. And this arms race has gone on for centuries with no end in sight. What is your point, human?" Commander Vrethel asked. And some of his amusement had faded. "My point is that humans do not fight the same way you do," Captain Chun said. "We do not try to match strength with strength because we learned long ago that there is always someone stronger. And instead we find the weakness and we exploit it. And we wait, and we watch, and we strike when our enemy least expects it. And we have been doing this for thousands of years. Pretty words, the commander replied. But words do not win wars. No, Captain Chen agreed. Actions win wars. And I am requesting that you allow human snipers to deploy with coalition forces in the next major engagement. This brought more laughter. Though it was not as loud as before. You want us to bring your primitives into a real battle, a Kethri general chittered. They will be killed in seconds, perhaps, Captain Chen said. Or perhaps you will see something that will change how you think about warfare forever. Commander Vrethal looked at the other officers, and they exchanged glances that communicated doubt and amusement and curiosity. Very well, he said finally. We will allow a small team of your snipers to join the defense of Meridian 4. And when they fail, you will accept that humans are not ready for galactic warfare. And you will stop wasting our time with these requests. Captain Chun bowed her head slightly in acknowledgement. And if they succeed, she asked, they will not succeed. Commander Vrathal said with absolute certainty. The Dominion forces attacking Meridian 4 include their elite guard units with the most advanced armor in the galaxy. And nothing short of orbital bombardment can penetrate their defenses. Then you have nothing to worry about, Captain Chun said. And she smiled a small patient smile that made Commander Vrethel feel strangely uneasy, though he could not explain why. As she turned to leave the chamber, she paused at the door and looked back at the assembled officers. I will send you the service record of the sniper I am assigning to this mission, she said. Her name is Staff Sergeant Maya Torres, and she has been shooting since she was 6 years old. And she has never missed a target that mattered. One soldier, Admiral Kestis scoffed. You are sending one soldier against the Dominion elite guard. One soldier is all we need, Captain Chen replied. And then she was gone. The officers looked at each other and shook their heads and returned to their planning, and their strategies, and their technology. And they forgot about the human snipers almost immediately, because they were real threats to worry about. They would remember soon enough. 3 months had passed since the meeting on Station Corvex 9, and the war had not been going well for the Coalition Meridian 4 was supposed to be a fortress world with defenses that could hold back any invasion force for years. But the Dominion had come with more ships and more soldiers than anyone expected. And they had overwhelmed the planetary defenses in just 3 days. And now 50,000 coalition troops were trapped in the capital city, surrounded by enemy forces on all sides. Overlord Kavik stood on top of his mobile command platform and looked out at the burning city with satisfaction. And he was a massive creature, nearly 4 meters tall, with thick scales covering his body and eyes that glowed with cruel intelligence. And he had conquered 17 worlds for the Dominion, and he had never lost a battle. Around him stood his personal guard. And there were 12 of them, and each one wore powered armor that had cost more than a starship to build. And each suit had shields that could stop tank rounds and weapons that could level buildings and sensors that could detect a heartbeat from a kilometer away. And they were connected to predictive AI systems that could intercept any attack before it landed. Kavex was untouchable, and he knew it. The Coalition has requested terms of surrender, his adjutant reported. And he was a smaller creature of the same species, who stood just behind his master with a datapad in his clawed hands. Interesting, Kavex rumbled. And his voice was like stones grinding together. What are they offering? Safe passage for civilians in exchange for the unconditional surrender of all military forces. Kavex laughed, and it was an ugly sound that made his guards shift uncomfortably. They are desperate, he said. Let them suffer for another week, and let them watch their soldiers starve and their defenses crumble. And then we will discuss terms, and those terms will not be favorable to them. As you command, Overlord. The coalition thinks they can negotiate with me, Kovacs continued. They do not understand that I do not want their surrender, and I want their destruction. And I want every species in this galaxy to see what happens to those who oppose the Dominion. He turned to look at his adjutant with those glowing eyes. I have heard that they brought humans to this battle, he said. Is this true? Yes, Overlord. A small team of human soldiers arrived 3 days before the siege began. And what have these humans done? Nothing of note. Overlord, they disappeared into the city, and we have not seen them since. And our commanders believe they are hiding like the cowards they are. Kovacs made a dismissive gesture with one massive hand. Humans are primitives, he said. They are barely worth noticing. And when we take the city, we will find them and we will make an example of them. And we will show the galaxy that no species is too small to escape our judgment. Yes. Overlord, shall I inform the commanders to continue the bombardment? Yes. And increase the pressure on the Eastern District. And I want their main power station destroyed by nightfall. And I want them to know that every hour they resist is another hour of suffering for their people. Kovacs turned back to survey the burning city, and he felt the satisfaction of absolute power flowing through him. He never saw the bullet coming. It struck him in the center of his forehead, and it passed through his skull and out the back of his head before he could even register that something was wrong. And his massive body was thrown backward off the command platform. And he was dead before he hit the ground. His adjutant had exactly 1 second to feel confusion before a second bullet struck him in the chest. And this bullet passed through the front of his armor and through his body and through the back of his armor and into the guards standing behind him, killing them both with a single shot 2 kilometers away in a crater that had been created by orbital bombardment 3 weeks earlier. Staff Sergeant Maya Torres lay perfectly still and chambered another round. She had been in this position for 46 hours without moving more than necessary to breathe. And she had not eaten solid food in 2 days because eating would have required movement. And she had not slept more than minutes at a time because sleep would have dulled her senses. And she had waited with the patience of a stone until her target appeared. Rifle was a work of art that had been designed specifically for this mission. And it was a 50 caliber anti-materiel system that fired custom rounds. And each round was a tungsten carbide penetrator wrapped in a crystalline lattice that had been engineered to vibrate at a specific frequency. Human scientists had spent months studying captured Dominion armor, and they had found something that no other species had ever noticed. And it was a tiny flaw in the energy dispersal matrix that only appeared under very specific conditions. And if a projectile hit the armor at exactly the right velocity and exactly the right angle with exactly the right vibrational frequency, then the shields would fail and the armor would crack and the bullet would pass through like a knife through paper. No other species in the galaxy had looked for this weakness because no other species in the galaxy still used kinetic weapons, and they assumed that bullets were primitive and useless against modern armor. And they were wrong. Torres watched through her scope as chaos erupted in the enemy command area. And officers were shouting, and guards were looking in every direction, trying to find where the shots had come from. And they activated their predictive AI systems, and their advanced sensors, and their shield emitters. None of it would help them. Torres sighted on a Dominion general who was trying to restore order, and she squeezed the trigger. And the rifle kicked against her shoulder, and the bullet flew true, and the general died. And his guards formed a protective circle around his body, without realizing that they were standing in the open, and that she could see all of them. She fired again and again, and each shot found its target. And each target died. And the enemy had no idea where the death was coming from. Corporal James Okonkwo lay beside her serving as her spotter. And he watched through his own scope and called out targets and wind conditions and range estimates. And together they were a machine of precision killing. Command is in full panic, he reported quietly. They are pulling back all units to defensive positions. Good, Torres replied. And her voice was calm and flat, like she was discussing the weather. That means they are scared. And scared enemies make mistakes. She fired again, and another officer fell. The siege of Meridian 4 was about to become very different. The next 6 hours were the worst that the Dominion forces on Meridian 4 had ever experienced. Officers died in the middle of giving orders, and their words simply stopped, and their bodies fell. And commanders died inside sealed bunkers when bullets came through walls that were supposed to be impenetrable. And pilots died inside their cockpits, and their vehicles crashed and exploded. And technicians died while working on shield generators, and the shields flickered and failed. No one knew where the shots were coming from. The Dominion troops had sensors that could detect heat signatures from orbit. And they had scanners that could find a hidden enemy by the electrical impulses in their brain. And they had drones that could search every square meter of the battlefield in minutes. And none of it helped because Torres and Okonkwo knew how to hide in ways that no technology could defeat. They moved every few hours. And they never used the same position twice. And they left false trails and decoys that sent enemy search teams running in wrong directions. And they used the terrain like was an old friend who knew all their secrets. By the 4th hour, the Dominion soldiers had stopped moving. Entirely, they huddled in their fortified positions. And they refused orders to advance because advancing meant stepping into the open, and stepping into the open meant death. And even the most hardened veterans were afraid because they could not fight an enemy they could not see. On Station Corvex 9 Commander, Vrethel watched the battle feeds with his mandibles hanging open in shock. The tactical display showed the Dominion siege collapsing in real time. And units that had been advancing on the city were now retreating. And command posts that had been coordinating the attack were now silent. And the whole enemy army was paralyzed by fear. How is this possible? He asked no one in particular. And his voice was barely a whisper. Admiral Kesef floated beside him, and her crystalline body had gone dark with confusion. Those are Class 7 personal shields, she said. They are rated to withstand megajoule impacts, and nothing smaller than a ship-mounted railgun should be able to penetrate them. And yet that human is killing armored soldiers with a chemical propellant weapon at ranges of over 2 kilometers. Captain Chun stood behind them with her arms folded across her chest, and she watched the display with quiet satisfaction. You reviewed our combat footage, she said, but you did not understand what you were seeing. Commander Vrethel turned to look at her, and for the first time there was no condescension in his expression. Explain, he demanded. Your species rely on technology to aim for you. Chum said, you have computers that calculate trajectory and wind speed and target movement. And you have sensors that tell you exactly where to shoot. And you have systems that practically pull the trigger for you. And all of this makes your soldiers very accurate, but it also makes them predictable. She stepped forward and pointed at the display where Torres had just eliminated another enemy officer. Staff Sergeant Torres does not use a targeting computer. Chun continued. She uses her eyes and her training and her instincts. And she makes calculations in her head that your computers cannot understand because they are not based on mathematics, but on thousands of hours of practice and experience. That is not possible, Admiral Kesef protested. The calculations required for a shot at that range are incredibly complex, and no organic brain could process them fast enough. Humans have been killing each other at range for over 10,000 years, Chun replied. We started with thrown rocks, and then we invented spears, and then bows, and then crossbows, and then rifles. And at every stage we got better and better at putting a projectile exactly where we wanted it. And our brains evolved to handle these calculations at a level that your scanners cannot even detect. She paused and let that sink in. Your species developed energy weapons 3,000 years ago, and you stopped practicing kinetic warfare. And why would you bother when you could just build a bigger laser? but we never stopped. And we kept refining and improving, and pushing ourselves to shoot farther and more accurately than anyone thought possible. On the display, Torres fired again and another enemy fell. She can read the wind by watching how dust moves. Chun said, she can calculate bullet drop by feeling the humidity in the air. And she can predict where a target will move by watching how they shift their weight. And she does all of this in a fraction of a second without conscious thought because it has been trained into her so deeply that it is part of who she is. Commander Vrethel shook his head slowly. One human, he said. One human is destroying their entire command structure. 2 humans, Chun corrected. Corporal Okonkwo is her spotter, and they work together as a team. And they have been training together for 5 years. And they know each other so well that they barely need to speak to communicate. The Kethri general who had mocked the human request weeks earlier stepped forward, and his insect eyes were wide with something that might have been fear. If one human can do this, he said. How many snipers does your species have? Captain Chun smiled that same small patient smile. Thousands, she said. And Torres is good, but she is not the best. And our best snipers can do things that would seem like magic to you. And they can hit targets that should be impossible to hit. And they can wait for days without moving and without eating and without sleeping because patience is the greatest weapon a sniper has. The assembly chamber was silent as the officers processed this information. The Dominion has never faced anything like this. Admiral Kesseth said finally, they have fought countless species across thousands of worlds, and they have always won because their technology is superior. But they have never fought an enemy who does not try to match their technology. Exactly, Chun said. We do not fight the way you expect, and that is why we are dangerous. And the Dominion is about to learn that lesson in the most painful way possible. On the display, the coalition forces trapped in the capital city began to move. And they had seen the enemy paralyzed by fear. And they knew that this was their chance to strike back. And the siege that had seemed hopeless hours ago was now turning into a rout. The Dominion High Command was furious, but they were not stupid. They had lost an overlord and dozens of senior officers to a single human sniper, and they understood that this threat needed to be eliminated immediately. And so they sent the Silence. The Silence was a unit of 12 assassins who had been specifically designed and trained to hunt and kill high-value targets. And each one had been genetically modified for speed and strength and senses far beyond normal. And each one wore armor that could bend light around it, making them completely invisible. And each one carried weapons that could kill without sound or flash. And each one had neural dampeners that blocked their thoughts from psychic detection. They had never failed a mission. They landed on Meridian 4 in the dead of night, and they spread out across the battlefield like ghosts. And their sensors swept the ruins searching for any trace of the human snipers. And they moved in perfect silence, covering kilometers of ground without making a single sound. Torres felt them coming before any equipment could warn her. It was not something she could explain in words. And it was a prickle at the back of her neck and a tightness in her stomach, and a whisper in her mind that said danger was approaching. And she had learned to trust this feeling over years of combat because it had saved her life more times than she could count. Contact, she murmured to Okonkwo, and her voice was barely louder than a breath. Multiple targets. Flanking from the east. Okonkwo checked his sensors and shook his head. I am not seeing anything on thermal or motion or electromagnetic, he said. Are you sure? They are cloaked, Torres replied. But they are there. And I can feel them moving. She shifted her rifle slightly and scanned the terrain through her scope. And she did not look for shapes or movement because there was nothing to see. And instead she looked for wrongness. And she looked for places where the dust did not settle quite right, and where the light bent at angles that made no sense, and where shadows fell in directions that did not match the positions of the moons there 200 meters away at 11 o'clock. There was a shimmer in the air that was almost invisible, and it was moving fast and coming straight toward their position. Torres fired the bullet, crossed the distance in a heartbeat, and it struck empty air, and then suddenly there was a body where there had been nothing before, and the cloaking field flickered and died, and the assassin collapsed with a hole through his skull. The other 11 members of the Silence realized they had been detected, and they made a decision in an instant. And stealth was no longer an option, so they dropped their cloaking fields and charged. They were fast and they were deadly, and they moved like liquid shadows across the broken terrain. And they fired their silent weapons as they ran. And the shots hissed past Torres and Okonkwo's position close enough to feel the heat. Okonkwo rolled to his left and came up with his sidearm in his hands, and he fired twice in quick succession. And 2 of the assassins stumbled and fell. And his bullets had found the gaps in their armor because he knew where to aim. Torres did not have time to reload her rifle, so she swung it like a club as the first assassin reached her. And the heavy weapon caught him across the face and shattered his faceplate. And she followed through with a strike to his throat that crushed his windpipe. Another assassin lunged at her with a blade that hummed with energy, and she twisted aside and grabbed his wrist and used his momentum to throw him into a third assassin. And they both went down in a tangle of limbs. She drew her pistol and fired 3 shots. And each shot found a target. And 3 more assassins. Okonkwo was fighting hand to hand with 2 of them. And they were faster than him and stronger than him, but he had been training for this since he was a child. And he knew how to use their strength against them. And he ducked under a strike and drove his knife into the gap between helmet and chestplate. And then he spun and kicked the other assassin in the knee joint and brought her down and finished her with a shot to the back of the head. Torres faced the last 4 assassins, and they circled her with their weapons ready. And they were more cautious now because they had seen what she could do. "You are impressive for a primitive," one of them said, and his voice was distorted by his helmet speakers. "But you cannot defeat all of us." Torres did not respond with words. She moved. It was not something that should have been possible, and it was not something that any sensor could have predicted. And she flowed like water through their formation, and her pistol barked 4 times in less than a second. And each shot was fired from an angle that no computer would have calculated, because no computer understood how a human body could move like that. 4 assassins fell. Torres stood in the center of the carnage, and she was breathing hard, and her hands were covered in blood. But they were steady as stone. And around her lay the bodies of 12 of the most dangerous killers the Dominion had ever created. Okonkwo limped over to her, and he was holding his side where a blade had grazed him. And he looked at the bodies with something like awe. "How did you know where they would move?" he asked. "I did not know," Torres said. "I felt it, and they moved like predators, and I have been studying predators my whole life. And I understood their instincts better than they understood mine." She picked up her rifle and checked it for damage, and found it still functional. "Command," she reported into her comm. "Threat neutralized, and we have confirmed 12 enemy assassins down. And we are relocating to secondary position. And we will resume Overwatch in 1 hour." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "Sergeant Torres," Commander Vrethel's voice came through, and it sounded strange, like he was having trouble speaking. "Did you just say you eliminated 12 silence operatives?" "Affirmative." "Commander." Another long pause. "How?" he asked. Torres looked at the bodies of the assassins who had been created specifically to hunt and kill beings like her. And she thought about all the years of training, and all the battles she had survived, and all the enemies she had defeated. "We are human," she said simply, "and this is what we do." The siege of Meridian 4 collapsed completely 2 days after Torres eliminated the Silence Coalition forces trapped in the capital city. launched a massive counterattack against an enemy that was paralyzed by fear and confusion. And Dominion soldiers who had been unstoppable just days earlier now refused to advance because they knew that invisible death was waiting for them. And commanders who had been confident of victory now gave orders to retreat. Because they had no one left to lead their troops, the enemy fell back to their landing zones and they loaded onto their transport ships and they fled into space. And for the first time in the history of the war, the Coalition had won a decisive ground battle against the Dominion. The news spread across the galaxy like fire. Species that had been losing hope now began to believe that victory might be possible. And governments that had been considering surrender now decided to keep fighting. And everywhere people talked about the human snipers who had done the impossible and killed the unkillable. On Station Corvex 9, Commander Vrethel requested a private meeting with Captain Chen. The chamber was empty, except for the two of them. And Vrethel stood with his forearms hanging at his sides, and his massive body somehow looked smaller than before, like something had been taken out of him. "I owe you an apology," he said. And his translator rendered his clicking mandibles into words that sounded heavy and tired. "I dismissed your species because your technology seemed primitive. And I assumed that primitive technology meant primitive capabilities. And I was wrong." Captain Chen nodded, but she did not gloat. "It is a common mistake," she said. "Every species we have encountered has made the same assumption. And they see our chemical propellant weapons and our mechanical systems, and they think we are thousands of years behind the galactic standard. And they do not understand what they are truly dealing with. And what are we truly dealing with?" Vrethel asked. Chun thought about the question for a moment before answering. "Do you know how humans became the dominant species on our planet?" she asked. "I am not familiar with your evolutionary history. We were not the strongest or the fastest or the most dangerous creatures on our world," Chun said. "There were predators that could tear us apart, and prey animals that could outrun us, and environments that should have killed us. And yet we survived and we spread across every continent and every climate zone on our planet." She walked to the viewport and looked out at the stars. "We survived because we learned to adapt," she continued. "When we faced a threat, we did not try to become bigger or stronger. And instead, we invented tools to extend our capabilities. And when our tools were not enough, we invented better tools. And when our enemies adapted to our tools, we invented new tactics. And this cycle of invention and adaptation has been going on for hundreds of thousands of years." She turned to face Vrethel. "Your coalition has incredible technology," she said. "The Dominion has numbers and brutality. But humans have something that neither of you possess. And we have the ability to look at a problem that seems impossible and find a solution that no one else would think of. Like using ancient projectile weapons against advanced energy shields," Vrethel said. "Exactly. And your species never considered that possibility because it seemed so absurd. And why would anyone use bullets when you have plasma cannons? And the Dominion made the same assumption. And that assumption killed their overlord and their officers and their elite assassins." Vrethel was silent for a long moment as he processed this. "The Dominion will not make this mistake again," he said finally. "They will adapt their armor and their tactics to counter your snipers." "I am counting on it," Chun replied. "Because when they adapt, we will adapt too. And when they think they have solved the problem, we will find a new problem for them. And this is what humans do. And we have been doing it for so long that it is woven into our very nature." She smiled that same small patient smile that Vrethel was beginning to understand. "You see," she continued, "you have been fighting the Dominion with technology against technology, and the species with the better technology wins. But we fight differently, and we fight with creativity and patience and determination. And those things cannot be countered with better shields or faster weapons." "What do you want from the Coalition?" Vrethel asked. And there was a new respect in his voice. "I want you to let us fight the way we know how to fight," Chun said. "I want you to deploy human soldiers, not as support troops, but as specialists who can do things that your technology cannot do. And I want you to stop trying to make us fit into your military structure, and instead let us show you what we are capable of." Rethel considered this proposal. The other species will not accept humans giving orders to their troops. He said, "We do not want to give orders." Chun replied, "We want to work alongside you as equals. And we want to share our knowledge and learn from your knowledge. And we want to find ways to combine our different strengths into something that the Dominion has never faced before. And you believe this will work." Chun looked out at the stars again, at the countless worlds that were still under Dominion control, at the battles that were still waiting to be fought. "I believe that the Dominion has never encountered a species like us," she said. "And I believe that they have no idea what is coming for them. And I believe that when we are done, they will understand that the galaxy made a very serious mistake when it underestimated humanity." Rethel made a sound that his translator rendered as a sigh. "I believe," he said slowly, "that the galaxy has underestimated humanity for far too long. Most species only make that mistake once." Chun said. Far away on Meridian 4, Staff Sergeant Maya Torres was packing up her equipment and preparing to move to the next mission. And Corporal Okonkwo was checking their supplies and planning their route. And neither of them knew that their names were being spoken in coalition command chambers across the galaxy. Torres did not care about fame or recognition. And she did not care about politics or alliances or the fate of species she had never met. And she cared only about the mission and the skills she had spent her life developing and the enemies, who still needed to be stopped. "Where are we heading next?" Okonkwo asked. Torres looked at the datapad that contained their new orders, and she saw coordinates and target information and mission parameters. "There is a Dominion 4 base 3 systems away," she said. "Their commanders think they are safe because they have the strongest defenses in the sector." Okonkwo smiled. "Let me guess," he said. "They have never faced human snipers before." "They have not," Torres confirmed. "But they are about to learn." She shouldered her rifle and walked toward the transport that would take them to their next battlefield. And behind her, the bodies of the Silence lay where they had fallen. And ahead of her lay a galaxy full of enemies, who did not yet know that they were already dead. The war was far from over, but the equation had changed. The Dominion had ruled through fear and superior technology for 3,000 years. And they had never met an enemy who could not be crushed with enough force. And they had never imagined that a species with primitive weapons and short lifespans could pose a real threat to their empire. They were learning now, and they were afraid for the first time in millennia. The hunters had become the hunted, and the predators had met a species that knew how to be patient and how to wait and how to strike at exactly the right moment. And no amount of armor or shields or technology could protect them from an enemy who had been perfecting the art of killing for 10,000 years. The galaxy was watching, and humanity was just getting started.